US President Donald Trump has said repeatedly he wants to take over Greenland, an idea rejected by most people living there. There's alarm in Denmark, which owns the world's biggest island, and in the EU and NATO too. So could Trump really get his way? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Imran Khan. It's unlikely many people took US President Donald Trump seriously 7 years ago when he first mooted taking over Greenland. People living on the world's largest island and Denmark, which owns it, might have hoped he'd forgotten. Far from it. Trump's desire to acquire Greenland has become a repeated theme in his second term. His calls became even more explicit this month after the US attacked Venezuela and captured its president. Denmark has warned a seizure of the island could tear up international law and the NATO alliance. Most Greenlanders want nothing to do with Trump's plans. So why does the US president want Greenland? What stands in his way? And what does this mean for NATO and for Europe? We'll speak to our guest shortly, but first, this report from Alexandra Byers.
Donald Trump wants Greenland. For months, the U.S. president has made that clear. Now he says the U.S. will acquire the Danish territory and has even threatened military action to do so.
If we don't take Greenland, Russia or China will take Greenland, and I am not going to let that happen. I'd love to make a deal with them. It's easier. But one way or the other, we're going to have Greenland. Well, maybe NATO would be upset if I did it. Maybe NATO would save a lot of money.
Greenland is the world's largest island, home to just 56,000 people. It sits within the Arctic Circle, between North America and Europe. Its waters an important shipping route. Trump says the U.S. needs Greenland for its national security. It already hosts an American military base and a missile warning system. But Trump also has his eye on the island's resources. It's rich in minerals, graphite and copper, plus lithium and rare earth elements used in cell phones and electric vehicles. Climate change is causing the Arctic to warm 3 times faster than the rest of the planet. And melting ice means those minerals will be easier to get to. Opinion polls suggest most Greenlanders have no desire to become part of the United States.
We have been at a colony in so many years. We are not ready to be a colonized again.
Denmark, a NATO member, has made it clear the semi-autonomous territory is not for sale.
I also want to make it clear that if the United States chooses to attack another NATO country, then everything stops, including NATO, and thus the security that has been provided since the end of the Second World War.
The U.S. Secretary of State is due to discuss the issue with Denmark's foreign minister this week. The EU has already debated how it could respond if the U.S. decides to act on its threats.
Nothing can be decided about Denmark and about Greenland without Denmark or without Greenland. They have the full support and solidarity of the European Union.
The issue poses a dilemma for both Europe and NATO, desperate to keep Trump on board in Russia's war in Ukraine. That reluctance to anger Trump adds to uncertainty for Greenlanders and fears they could be left out in the cold. Alexandra Byers, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests from the Greenlandic capital, Nuuk. We're joined by Pele Broberg, chairman of Naleraq, a pro-independence political party in Greenland. In White Sands in Denmark, we have Peter Nielsen, a retired colonel in the Danish Armed Forces who specialises in NATO readiness. And in Chicago, Greg Swenson, chairman of Republicans Overseas UK and a financial and political commentator. Welcome to you all. I want to start with you, Greg, first in Chicago. The Treaty of 1951 is very, very clear. It allows for US troops to be in Greenland. It also allows for the expansion of those troops to be in Greenland. Everything that Donald Trump wants, it seemingly you already have. So Why does he want ownership?
Yeah, I think the president's thinking ahead. And yes, right now, the situation is pretty favorable for everybody, especially for NATO, because the Americans, we have a base in Greenland. But prior to that agreement in 1951, the U.S. was able to have many more bases, up to 50 at the time, and that was reduced to one by that agreement. And then, of course, you had other changes over the years. So like for example, in 1979 with the Home Rule Act, which gives the people of Greenland a lot more say into the ultimate outcome. I'll of course let my guest from Greenland get into that detail, but I think the president's thinking ahead. And what he said in the introduction is important. It's not just that the U.S. needs to have that for U.S. security, but it's that the alternative is Russia and China. And so, yes, the U.S. can defend Greenland from the base that we have there, but I think we need a lot more. This is a real critical part of the emerging Arctic shipping circles. It's one end of the Arctic corridor, and the other end, of course, is Alaska, which we obviously have. So I think the president's thinking ahead.
Pele, I want to come to you next. This idea that Donald Trump can simply buy Denmark or take it by force militarily is something that has been dismissed as being a very long shot option, to be polite. But, you're a pro-independence party. That's really clear that that's what you're looking for. You're not looking to replace one colonizer with another, surely.
No, that's absolutely correct. And I think I can elaborate a little bit more on the question you just asked, because you have to remember there's a difference between that the U.S. has access to Greenland or has, let's call it, a right to be the only military power, exclusivity to Greenland. And I think if you look at other free associated states, the U.S. has, with others, they have exclusivity, which means that other people's navies, armies, whatever, cannot go there without the U.S. approval. That's very different from what we have with the agreement in 1951. Well, basically that the Danes have with the U.S. because it was made while we were a colony. So yeah, that's absolutely correct. We are not looking to replace one with the other. But again, we are also not trying to be the wedge between the Western countries. Greenland is a Western alliance aligned country. We see both towards Europe as friends, the U.S., Iceland, basically everybody. We are a nation whose people never have been at war, and we're not looking to pick a fight now either.
Peter, I'm going to come to you next. There's so much talk about China and Russia being a threat to Greenland. I can't find any real evidence of that. Can you?
No, I can't. And I think that's, the truth on the ground is that the U.S. has reduced its bases on Greenland, and I think that's the testimony that there is no real threat towards Greenland for the moment. Now there's of course the ballistic missile warning system that the U.S. definitely needs, and I also see ahead in the future, as Greg mentioned, that there might be some changing on the waterways around the Nordic or that area. But I think that's also why Denmark has committed to use millions of dollars or billions of dollars to acquire ships, airplanes, drones, surveillance equipment, and infrastructure to build out our defenses in the Arctic area. So I think it's, to be honest, a false argument, and I think we should seek otherwise or otherwhere to find the real arguments.
Well, let's get into that. Greg, one of the things that you do is that you are linked with a firm called Brigg McAdam, which is heavily invested in minerals, and Greenland has minerals. So there's a vested interest for the US for you taking over?
Well, yeah, there sure is. There's no doubt. You can't ignore the critical minerals argument. And we, the U.S. and the West, the rest of the West, are completely dependent on China for rare earth minerals and other critical minerals. And that's something that has to change. We saw that change a bit with the changes in Venezuela, of course, because there's a massive amount of critical minerals there. It's not just oil. But yeah, there's, look, between critical minerals, hydrocarbons, fisheries, there are economic interests. And I think that's one argument, is that the people of Greenland would benefit greatly from additional or much greater investment, which I'm not sure that the Danes and the Europeans are capable of. The U.S. economy is much bigger and more powerful and can make those kind of investments. So, but this is also national security. And even though China and Russia, as Peter mentioned, they haven't had a physical or direct threat in Greenland, they could as these waterways open up. And then more importantly, the U.S. dependence, the Pentagon's dependence on China for critical minerals is something that is completely unsustainable. And Greenland can be a big part of reducing the reduction of that dependency.
But Greg, you can do a deal for minerals. I'm going to come to Pele now. You saw what happened in Venezuela. You saw what happened to Nicolas Maduro. This is a US government that is willing to break international law to get what it wants. And as Greg just said there, it wants minerals and it wants oil. Now, that's something that could happen to, Greenland. And you're shaking your head, but there is a case study, surely. You have to be taking it at least seriously.
No, I can't take that argument seriously because Venezuela and Greenland has nothing in common.
Oh, they've got minerals.
We have a democracy. We have elected people that actually all of them are friendly towards the U.S. The U.S. is an ally of the government of Greenland as well as the opposition. So no, taking a dictator and comparing it to a peaceful democracy, you can't do that. But we can talk about the critical minerals because even though we're not independent yet from Denmark, the U.S. can still make a deal with minerals in Greenland. But what they might have a problem with is that it's up to the Greenlandic people when and how to actually those are extracted. So, I don't underestimate the possibility of a threat, but I'm just trying to say that we will decide how and when, as it is right now, as well as in the future. But we are not in a position where we are hostile towards the U.S. and its investment. On the contrary, we welcome them.
But you might have a US government that is a little, at least, hostile to you. Peter, the words that the US President Donald Trump said, there is an easy way of doing this and there is a hard way of doing this. Peter, what's the hard way look like and can it work?
Well, the hard way is the nightmare scenario for me, being a front speaker for the U.S. Since high school, working with U.S. Military colleagues in Bosnia and in Afghanistan and lately in NATO in Lithuania. I've always had this very close relationship with the U.S. and a very nice relationship. And I do understand the need for the minerals in the future. That's also acknowledged. But I think the threat of using the hard way or not ruling out the use of military forces is an unnecessary escalation of the rhetoric and the discussion in the open space. I mean, this is issues that should be dealt with diplomatically, and there are agreements and rules and meetings are held, but it's like there's a parallel world going on where you have the diplomatic channels working, and then there's this open space where it gets just escalating, and that's really not good.
Let me bring Greg in here. Now, this is actually the crucial point, isn't it? That you do have diplomacy that is taking place because it needs to. It has to happen between Greenland and the US. But then you have a US president who loves the TV cameras and loves shocking people. That's not helping the diplomacy, surely. Donald Trump needs to stop, doesn't he?
Well, I think that's the president's style, and I don't think he will stop, but I think it's probably temporary. He says these things off the cuff and sort of throws a grenade in the room, and then everything dials down and everything works out. And we've seen this pattern for years now. So, and look, Marco Rubio is a fantastic diplomat. The U.S. ambassador to Denmark, Ken Howery, fantastic guy, great businessman, great investor, but also a great diplomat. He served as the ambassador to Sweden in Trump's first term. So, look, I think there's a lot of diplomacy going on, and I agree with all the points that are made, in this discussion. That ultimately it will be the common interest of Greenland and Denmark and NATO, not just the United States. And this could end up being a compact of free association, which the U.S. has with many smaller countries that we're associated with the COFA. So I think there's a lot of positive outcomes here. And yeah, I think the president dials up the rhetoric, and that's just, in many ways, it's just a negotiating style. And I don't think we'll see a lot of that.
Yeah, but it's a negotiating style that we have seen the US employ before, not just with President Donald Trump. Pele, I just want to remind you of fairly recent history. 1953, the CIA overthrew a democratically elected government in Iran. We're seeing the results of that today. America does do this with less inflammatory language than Donald Trump has used. So are you still not taking it seriously?
No, as I said, it's not a matter if I take it seriously. I'm just trying to illustrate the importance of we are a democracy that are aligned with the U.S.
So was Iran in 53.
In any way, shape, or form.
So was Iran in 1953. Didn't stop the CIA.
Well, regime changes happen around the world for some reason or the other. But in Greenland, we are not that many. How would they replace this current government? Because the U.S. government can't replace them with me. I would never accept our government be troubled by the outside. It doesn't matter how much I don't trust their politics in our internal politics, but I stand for democracy with them, and they are my government, even though I'm in opposition. I will never replace that government with my own because a different country wants that to do so. We will make sure that even though we are few, we stand together. And we just sent out a press release this Friday stating exactly that. We don't want to be Americans. We don't want to be Danes. We want to be Greenlandic. So I think all the parties here, all the political establishment, all the people stand behind that. So you can't just wipe out 56,000 people and put in new people up here. That's what you would need to do to have what you call a regime change. And this is not a regime. This is a democratically elected government. And as I said, no matter how much we would disagree with internal politics, I will stand firmly behind them.
Let's get into the international politics of this. It was a very good answer from you about the domestic politics there. Peter, I want to talk to you specifically now about NATO and NATO's option. This is the founder of the alliance, the United States, that is effectively threatening, verbally at least, another member, Denmark. Now, Greenland isn't a member. It's a protectorate of sorts. So where does this leave NATO? And why isn't Mark Rutte, the leader of NATO, saying anything about this strongly?
Well, it's a dilemma right now because other things are going on. I think the most important thing for Europe right now is the war or the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So we need to focus on that, and we need to have the US involved in that. And I think this is why you also see some reluctance from some European leaders to go out openly and make this discussion worse than it is already. So I think there's a lot going on, and it will be. I think some speakers and analytics have been talking about the end of NATO if there will be a US deliberate takeover of Greenland. And I think we need to take this seriously, to be honest, because if we don't, then we just might make a really bad mistakes. Reports are coming out that US SOCOM has been ordered to make a plan for the takeover, and I don't even know if this is a legal order to give to the US military to take over, to make a land grab from an ally. I think, of course, as Pele says, it's negotiation tactics are also involved here. But I would just urge that we really need to sit down and talk about this and see what is the issues and find out what it is, and then see how much we can meet the issues from the different parties, because this is a really destructive discussion to have in the open, and we should totally avoid this.
But it is a discussion that we are having in the open. Greg, Donald Trump's not a big fan of international organizations. He's just pulled out of, I think, 61 international organizations in the UN. He's massively criticized NATO. He said countries aren't spending as much as their GDP as they should be. They should be up to 5%. A lot of them are around 2%. He's not a big fan of the idea of NATO. So if NATO falls to pieces, he's not going to shed a tear, right?
No, I disagree. I think he is a fan of NATO. In fact, if anything, he's made NATO stronger, at least from the perspective of the commitments from the NATO countries going up to 5%. So no, the president, it's probably one of the few multilateral organizations that he does like. And he's had some criticisms of it. He doesn't like the fact that, the U.S. has basically been carrying the weight for NATO for 80 years now. He wants a little more fairness and a little more equitable contributions, but that means a stronger NATO. So now I think this is the one organization that the president does support, and he wants it to be better. And also, the U.S. is stepping up. He's proposed a $1.5 trillion military budget. I mean, that's essentially a 50% increase. And would significantly raise the stakes. But, good for President Trump for making those criticisms. President Obama had the similar comments, perhaps delivered it in a more delicate way. But I think, net NATO is stronger because of President Trump.
Pele, we've talked about NATO, but I want to get your thoughts on the European Union. There are 27 member states of the European Union that don't seem to be able to come up with a unified position on this particular issue. Where is your party's, and where do you think Greenland should be when it comes to the European Union? And do you think the European Union can help here?
Well, first of all, I think the history speaks for itself. We are the first country to leave the European Union. So we have left the European Union. We are not going to be a member again. But the second part of it is our political party has taken the independence case seriously. We made plans for it, how to do it, when to do it, and all that. And the process we have described is pretty simple. And what the European Union can do is what they already have done, saying it's up to the Greenlandic people to decide when and how to do that. Because in 2009, Denmark turned over a note to the UN Secretary General saying the Greenlandic people is now recognized as a people with a full right to self-determination. And until such time, they're part of the kingdom. But because we are recognized as a people, we now have the power to shape our own future. And that power should be supported by everybody who wants to support international law and order, because that has nothing to do with the Kingdom of Denmark's territory, but with a people. And territories don't have rights. Peoples have a right. So I think we are getting there. I don't think there is any country in the world that hasn't supported our right to full determination, including the US. So I think they should keep up that. But again, as Peter Nielsen also said, what people need to realize is that we need to dial down the rhetoric with regards to these past events and start to figure out, well, what's the case to satisfy the American needs for security and our need for independence, because you can't threaten your way to a friendship. You can only
Sorry,
do that.
Pele, I'm going to stop you there because you've made a very important point that I want to bring to Peter. Now, Peter, there's two things here. Firstly, you've got to dial down the rhetoric. That's not going to happen. That's not something that Donald Trump does naturally. He'll have to be told, and let's see how that works out. However, the EU, like I say, is 27 member states that aren't united when it comes to reacting to the US. So what are the good options here for the European Union politically, and how can they deal with the US president that is as unpredictable as he is?
Now, the European Union member state, of course, needs to be come to an agreement on how they will answer to this. And I think it's also a dilemma because there are many interests at stake. But I think, and I'll just go back, retrack one step here. I think we need to take this serious. On the other hand, so one side we need to dial down the rhetoric, but we also need to take it seriously. And one way to make this serious is to conduct more of the activities that we did last year. So there were a number of exercises between the Danish armed forces and the U.S. armed forces in Greenland last year, and there was also the biggest Danish-led exercise with participation from other Nordic countries and also from France especially, and from Germany in Greenland. So and right now we are training young Greenlanders as conscript. That's a new.
Sorry, Peter, we are running out of time. We are running out of time. We've only got about a minute or so left. I want to come back to Greg Swenson. Greg, everything that you've heard so far, do you think that's the kind of conversation that's is happening in the US, in the mainstream media? And do you think people are, educated about what Greenland actually means to Greenlanders and to Denmark?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Greenland has had an ambassador. If it's not officially an ambassador, it's another diplomatic title. An independent representative from Greenland to the U.S. for generations. And so, look, I think the relationship is positive, as Pele has mentioned, and Peter has reinforced. I mean, everybody's ultimately on the same page. It's how we get there that could, have some different moving parts. But I do think ultimately the Americans are supportive of independence for Greenland and supportive of the people.
I'm going to stop you there because I do want to put that point.
Security interests are aligned.
We are running out of time, but Pele, I want to put that point to you as well. If cooler heads prevail, and has this fast-forwarded the independence movement for Greenland? It's now on the table. People are talking about it, right?
Well, both yes and no. Right now, it sounds like it has set it back internally in Greenland because people are afraid. So the people that don't want independence, especially from Denmark, is using it to say, well, now is not the time to talk independence. We need to stand together, Denmark and Greenland. The problem is that we have nothing in common with Denmark with regard to our independence. So we don't know yet. But of course, we will have a meeting day after tomorrow between our foreign ministers. And I think we'll take it from there.
I want to thank all our guests, Pele Broberg, Peter Nielsen and Greg Swenson, and thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com, and for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Imran Khan, and the whole team here, bye for now.